Has Amazon lost its way since Bezos left? Is it day 2? Which place has a better tech culture, Meta or Amazon? You retired in your 40s. Were you lucky or were you good? You created a guide about how to be a senior engineer, but you never were one. Why should people listen to you? Today's guest went from a Midwest cubicle to running billion-dollar products at Amazon, rising through 3 promotions to become a director and general manager during the company's hyper-growth years. He helped reshape Amazon's entire transfer policy, conducted hundreds of bar raiser interviews, and then walked away from it all at 42, after saving 85% of his income and achieving complete financial independence. Now, from his early retirement, he's built one of Substack's most influential tech newsletters with over 70,000 readers, sharing unfiltered insights about what really drives success in big tech. This is my conversation with Dave Anderson. Thank you, Dave, for stopping by the studio to have this conversation.
I'm glad to be here. Really cool studio.
So let's do your origin story. What were the critical moments of your life or career that were inflection points that changed the trajectory of your life?
Well, here's an interesting one. So I was interested in being a doctor. I was going to go to pre-med, except freshman year of high school, I got chickenpox. And my teacher was a bit of a jerk in my intro to theater class, and he gave me a D because I missed a test. When I applied to school for pre-med program, I applied to some other schools for various majors, including computer science, thinking if pre-med doesn't work out, I'll do computer science. And the pre-med program turned me down because they said we're not allowed to have anyone in pre-med who has a D ever. Wow. And I had D only in intro to theater, which is just like a funny class to have a D in, and it was because of chickenpox. So I shrugged, as teenagers do, and became a computer scientist. So I would say that was quite an interesting pivot for my life. Then I would say going to Amazon was obviously a huge pivot. I was in the Midwest at a B2B company, spending time earning a salary rather than growing my career. I could look back and think like years went by where a lot of things didn't change, whereas at Amazon, every 6 months, something major happened in my career, or something I learned something major. I applied randomly to Amazon.
Help me understand. You say you randomly applied to Amazon, and maybe your experience or your resume wasn't one that you would think would be something that would be successful were you to apply to Amazon. And so, what was the catalyst for that? You weren't just, cruising on the internet looking for jobs, were you?
Well, that was basically it. So I was working at a B2B company where tech is a cost center. And for anyone who's ever worked at a tech company versus a company where tech is a cost, anything you want to do is always viewed as like the default answer is no. And we should always pick the cheapest option. We should always pick the good enough option. Mm-hmm. I vaguely knew for many years that it'd be nice to go to a tech company. I just didn't know how to move from a very, very, very small team at a publishing company to a tech company. And so I would say every 3 months, I applied to a company I'd heard of. I probably was failing all the time because my resume was terrible, which worked out. It just worked out. But I probably spent 3 years, probably applied to 12, 16 jobs. Just once in a while, I'd apply to 1 or 2 and then move on with my life.
Was it a function of your unhappiness at the role? Is that something that you did when you were at Amazon as a director, where you sort of shooting your resume out every 3 months?
No, I was dissatisfied because the role was easy and relaxing. And I, in fact, remember talking to my coworker and said, this is the job we should retire to, because you can't get fired for not doing work. Your expectations are very low. You could spend weeks doing almost nothing and no one notices. I was applying to jobs because mild boredom. It wasn't hard. It wasn't challenging. It wasn't stressful. It was just, I'm not going anywhere with my life. That was one of my favorite things by far of Amazon is, if I want to change jobs because I'm feeling bored, I can look inside of the company and I can transfer, and you just carry your stuff down a hallway and put it somewhere else.
I think a lot about velocity. And I think, what year did you join Amazon?
2007.
Okay. So I started in 2006. So very similar times. The company, when I joined Amazon in 2006, was smaller than the Prime Video organization. That was the last organization that I was in before I left.
Yep.
We started selling things other than books, but fundamentally, when we started at the company, we were still a bookstore.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. When I left, I think there's a little bit of this feeling of bloat that we were not moving as quickly as we could. Now that I'm on my own, I felt like I was very responsive as an individual. Hey, let's sync up on that, on Monday or something like that. Now that I'm on my own, it's like you can just get it done, like right now.
Yep.
And so maybe I can ask you this point blank. Do you think that since Jeff Bezos has left, the company has changed fundamentally? Is it day 2 at Amazon?
I think, and I hope Jeff doesn't watch the video, I think that a few years before Jeff left that he started bowing out. Like I got the impression like there was projects and investments that were made that I think, I and others would look around and say, why is this not stopped? This seems like a waste of money. This weird thing that they're implementing, I feel like this is not Amazon. And I feel like in the past, Jeff would have just come down with his hammer and said, this is stupid and let's move on. And it stopped happening. And I suspect it's because he was taking his steps out. So I would just, timing wise, say, first of all, I would move it a few years before Jeff left when maybe he wasn't paying as much attention. So I would say a little bit of yes. I do think that things have move a lot slower. Everything I've seen before I left and before Jeff left, I think that it was grinding down in a lot of places. I wouldn't say it's everywhere, because one of my last teams I worked in was the kids' devices group. And I think it worked really well. But then you move into the groups, or you interact with the groups that have 2,500 people, and you start to see like those processes of like, we need the program review meeting, then the pre-program review meeting, and then the we need the committee to decide on the whatever. And that doesn't feel Amazon at all. And so I would say like there's this mixture of, as groups grow and as they're not staying in that 2 pizza format, but they're in the like pizza franchise format. It's almost inevitable that you end up slowing down if you don't have that kind of mentality. And again, Jeff checked out. I swear Jassy was like, when I was in AWS, he felt a lot more like Jeff than everything I'm seeing these days. So it's hard to say.
I'd like to share something important. Linear is now the presenting sponsor of this podcast for the entire next year. This isn't just another ad deal. I chose Linear because they represent everything we talk about on this podcast, building exceptional things like your career with taste, craft, and an obsession with quality. When I left Amazon, I tried managing my content business with traditional project management software. And to be honest, it slowed me down. I spent way too much time setting things up and then telling my team what the new process was. Linear is different because they said no to endless customization. They optimize for the use cases that people who need to ship actually need, not on things like generating reports about why they're not shipping. Whether you're building software or building content, the fundamentals are the same. You need tools that help you focus on the work, not manage the work. This is why OpenAI, Cursor, and Perplexity, basically every AI company reshaping our industry, runs on Linear. When you're moving that fast, you can't afford tools that slow you down. While I'm definitely not OpenAI, I have moved my entire video production workflow to Linear. Every episode, every guest, every deadline, my entire team runs on it now. And here's the nail in the coffin that convinced me to make them our presenting sponsor. It took me 15 minutes to set everything up. Not days or weeks, 15 minutes. Whether you want to try it on that side gig or use it at work, visit linear.app/ALE and get 6 months of Linear business for free. Thanks again to Linear for sponsoring this video and the podcast.
So let's talk about your career trajectory. It largely mirrors Amazon's growth as well. I think the stock price was pretty small when it started at the company.
Yep.
But I also think as well, especially during this high growth period at Amazon, there was a lot of reward for working hard, to have the bias for action, to deliver on results. I think ultimately there's going to be some sort of costs when you go all in on your career. And so what were the hidden costs for you during that really meteoric growth period for the company and yourself?
The peak cost that I always think of is when I didn't hire a manager in time. I had like 14 direct reports. I wanted to do a good job for them. So we hit review period. And I was at work for about maybe 2.5, 3 weeks from like 8 a.m. until midnight. I go home, sleep, hurry back to work and do my full day of work, nightmarish. I was ready to quit. Like I was just so tired, could not think straight. That is also the kind of behavior that led to me getting promoted, because during that same time period, I had coworkers saying, I can't attend that meeting because I'm busy writing reviews. I can't take that over because I'm busy X. And during my peak career growth, I almost never said no. As much as I recommend people say no, it's like, do what I say, not as I do. A lot of my growth was because we'd be in a meeting. I'd be thinking, oh my gosh, I have no time for any of this. And then my manager would ask his staff, I need someone to run this new training for our, there was one, the VP wanted some kind of tech training. We need someone to help organize this tech training for our VP and his peers. And I said, I will, as fast as I could, because it's training for our VP. How do you not say I will right away? And my peers said, well, I'm just really busy right now. And I'm thinking, how can you be too busy for an opportunity? And I understand how you can, because you want to get home and spend time with your family. But my goal was definitely take advantage of everything I can, because at a company like Amazon, if you grow fast, no one's going to hold you back. Swing into that escalator thing just because I think it's really interesting. When I went to pick my major jobs for my career growth, which is my level 7 position and then my level 8 position, in both cases, I very carefully selected ones where I knew the escalator was going up quickly and would inevitably lead to my promotion. In both cases, I talked to the managers, talked about the space I would own, talked about the growth of the business and how much headcount would have to grow. And I was confident in both cases that my headcount would grow past where I should get promoted inevitably within a couple.
It sounds to me like if Midwest Dave comes to Amazon and just rides the escalator, not burning the candle on both ends, but maybe taking some of that Midwest sensibility, and letting projects take as long as they need to take and maybe not pushing as hard, that you probably would have done okay for yourself, just standing there. But the idea that you are also grinding, that you're also striving, while you're also choosing which escalator to ride. Hey, this one goes up higher, faster. Sort of like multiplying two big numbers together.
Yes, absolutely. I think if I had the personality where I could sit still for 12 years, I could have just stayed on that team and I would have become a director of payments and whatever. And I might have had a big org, and probably I could have just stayed still, done a decent job, and just been promoted because my group grew so much. This is, as a side note, true for managers. I don't think it's quite as true for engineers. There are engineers who sit still and nothing happens for the next 12 years. It's not a default like it is for managers of your group grows big enough, which, as a side note, is funny because there's the phrasing in leadership principle, or I forget exactly where the phrasing is, which is we don't reward, what is it? What's the phrasing for it? Building empires, essentially.
Empire building.
Empire, yeah. We don't reward empire building. And that's a running joke, is because of course we reward empire building for managers. It's a joke that we wouldn't reward it. It's at the top of the manager promotion document is size of org. And I was told that's if your number's not more than this, there was a very specific number given to me. If you're not greater than that, you cannot get promoted. If it's greater than that by a lot, then you will almost guaranteed get promoted. And that's just how it works for managers.
And so it sounds like there was a personal cost. I think working a 12, 14-hour day, obviously there's a cost to your mental capability. There's a cost to you physically. What about your relationships? We had spoken before this conversation that you had a child that's attending college coming up here. So it sounds like they were growing up at the same time you were grinding at work. Do you feel like you could have done better in that respect, or you might have made a different choice looking back on your past?
Well, to clarify, and because I think it's interesting, the 18-year-old is from my wife's previous marriage. And so I was not with him at the time. And at the time, I was doing those 14-hour days. I was in my previous marriage, and that was falling apart at the same time. But I would say not due to the long hours. But I would say if you're willing to spend 14 hours a day at work, what else is in your life at that point? How can you possibly be doing this? What is happening in your life? Because I know what was happening in my life, which was nothing at all other than work. And so I was willing to do that because in my life, it fit into my schedule. I think in my estimation, it's not what you can do once you have kids and a family and stuff. It just doesn't make much sense to grind like that. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I would argue that people should grind early in their career. It's a great time to put in all the hours, and then you dial it back As a director, like your time frame is not, I can get promoted in 2 years. It's just not likely to happen to VP. So you really can dial it back to reasonable hours and have a family and just make really smart decisions. It becomes less of a put in the hours and you get promoted thing.
It sounds like the grind did not cause your marriage to fall apart, but there's some correlation there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
So
I would say
bad
I
relationship.
was willing to put in long hours because I had a relationship problem.
Yeah. I think my takeaway there is, the world and companies, they reward people, and it's not necessarily fair. Like in a perfect world, you should be able to have a family and then be able to rise through the ranks of your corporate job. In a perfect world, you shouldn't be judged, with somebody that has good boundaries, but you are. Like in a vacuum, there's somebody that just grinds their life away because they don't have any obligations versus somebody that has set healthy boundaries for themselves. You're going to choose the one that has made unhealthy decisions for themselves.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I think, when you say fair, I think nothing is fair. As a manager, which I've spent my time at Amazon as, I'm looking to promote people who will have an even greater impact at the next level. Like when you have someone kicking butt, taking over projects, you put them on another project, they do well there. I want to label them as a higher level person. I want them to influence that project not as an L6, but as an L7. I want them to be the principal over that project because they'll be even more effective. If that's due to them putting in 12-hour days and their coworkers are doing less because they're doing 8-hour days, which is totally reasonable and I have no problem with it, I'm not punishing the 8-hour person. I am rewarding the 12-hour person. And just the thing is if you're in a group of people and someone's being rewarded, chances are it's the person putting in the extra hours. I wouldn't want to say it's only because of putting in extra hours for sure, because I think there's also big aspects of like efficiency. I wanted to be very efficient with my work because that allowed me to do more. I distinctly remember sitting in my office. I had a office mate as a dev manager. I'm talking about level 5 dev manager. My office mate and I regularly would have the exact same work assignments because it's an org, they would say, all managers, please, estimates is an easy one to use. Everyone, please estimate these new 62 project proposals coming in for OP1. So please, you need to write down your team's estimates. I would sit down with those 52 things, do them in 45 minutes, submit it back to the group, and move on with my day, going to meetings. My coworker would spend the next 2 days working 6 hours, carefully writing down detailed estimates for each of these. I was always very careful. I always, it's like jokingly, but I think it's correct, is like doing the bare minimum in many cases is critical to being efficient. And so I would very carefully say, okay, they don't need precision. So I'm going to put down really fast estimates and move on with my day.
Doing the minimum amount quickly and then getting corrected when you need something a little bit higher quality. That's a sensible default in my book. Instead of saying, okay, well, everything that comes in, I will do at a world-class level, but you might be pounding sand or there's a gigantic diminishing return if you get over precise.
You're building an admin tool for your team to restart your servers and you add in 17 layers of testing and it has a beautiful UI. This is the worst case, and it's distributed to 3 regions. It's like, dude, this could have been running on your desktop and you could have been done in 10 minutes, but it's like, that's the pinnacle of like the engineering version of like, wow, you overdid this. And that's not like, good job, you built it really pretty. It's just a waste of money. Like you're throwing it in the garbage.
The way I'd like to approach this conversation is I want to make a distinction between knowing how to do a thing in technical depth and then doing it on the job. So I don't think a manager needs to check code in, needs to deploy it, needs to write tests against it. That's fine. It would be nice if they did it every once in a while, kind of like undercover boss style, and then the team could rally around them and be like, okay, well, Dave's gotten stuck there. We probably need to update our onboarding. Like it needs to be, good enough that, any manager, they know tech enough, right? They should be able to check in. So, but I don't think that's a good use of a manager's time necessarily. But there's another type of conversation where it's like, would you prefer a manager that had been say, a senior software engineer that's leading a team of seniors and potentially even a larger team, would you prefer them to have been somebody that checked code into production and is going through some of the stuff that the people on your team have gone through? And I think that discussion is different from the one about whether the manager should code.
Yeah. On one hand, you said, would you prefer? And I think that that's a tricky one, because would you prefer is going to be yes, because it's only a positive thing. Would you prefer them to have coding skills? Yes, I would prefer them to be distinguished engineer level coding. Like, if I can get that for free. But none of this is for free, because everyone is very different. And I would say I would put high levels of coding skill at just about the bottom, far, far below empathy, ability to time manage, ability to,
grow people. And
there's just like an infinite list of things I would put above a high level of coding skill. I was a moderately poor mid-level engineer. I don't think I was ever good at writing code. When I moved into management at my previous company, I realized that I was a much better manager than I was an engineer. And so when we get to a place like Amazon, I think that it's critical that a manager be able to understand tech. So you like the idea of a non-tech manager moving into a engineering manager role. I don't buy that. But I would also say, like, I once, other than intern projects, which is a different thing, I once looked at a code review for one of my teams over 12 years. And that was as a joke. I just opened it up. I made a comment of like, I really like how you've used your semicolons. I think is like something I can put in there. And then I committed it because I thought it was just sort of funny. I don't know Amazon's code commit tools, like how to use them, because I never use them. I think teams almost never fail anywhere because their code was written poorly. If they have a code problem, it's most likely because their design was wrong, the requirements were wrong. I think you can almost always pull it back from just they knew everything and everything was laid out perfectly with the right people at the right time with the right projects, and they just wrote bad code. I guess I'm being extra picky by saying I don't think writing good code falls within the purview of something important for a manager. Now, I think there's a fine line, or a solid line, in fact, between what the code is to implement the plan and what the plan is. And I think the manager needs to be able to understand the plan. And, my strengths and weaknesses, I always was technical enough in my meetings and my teams once I was there for a little bit, that was not my weakness. So I think that being a moderately good programmer and being able to understand designs would be my bar.
I feel like a listener might misinterpret what's going on here, which is like, hey, I don't need to be a good coder. Dave was literally a mediocre coder at some B2B company in the Midwest, and then he became a tech director at Amazon. The takeaway shouldn't be, oh, you should be mediocre at the craft. But it seems like you were at a high level sort of rewarded for not having the depth for the people that you would end up hiring within your own organization. How would you respond to that?
Not having the depth to start with, and what skills we're talking about is like where all the nuances come in. I joined the networking team. I think this is a decent example. So I joined the AWS networking team, and I warned, boy, did I warn my manager and everyone else. I'm like, if you talk about like where everyone falls, like engineers and managers fall on the spectrum of understanding networking, I am really close to the bottom. Like before I joined, I'm like, I know that there are IP addresses and I don't know how they work. And I'm joining the networking team, right? Like this is ridiculous. And I'm going to run classic networking, which is more than half of AWS at the time. Like this is ridiculous. And they essentially said, we're sure you're going to figure it out. And so before I joined, I read cover to cover a couple of networking books. I sat down with every engineer on my team and I said, draw on the whiteboard everything like this, everything technical, how our network works, how networks work in general, write down all the services involved and how they work. One by one, I went through every person on the team and had them draw things. By the end of that drawing, I was able to say, I thought this talked to this, not to this. And then we would have good, deep conversations, of which almost always they have to pull in other engineers to ask questions. I sat down with our principal engineers and had them teach me how networking works. By 6 months, I was on our operational calls. Like I was the Sev one. I messaged Jesse and the other SVPs to say when we had problems. I was writing up those little messages on AWS's dashboard saying we're currently experiencing an outage in this region. It's not because I said it's not important to be technical. I think that what kind of technical you are and how much effort you're willing to put in. You don't need to become an expert at coding, but there's no excuse for a few months in not knowing the architecture of all of your systems, the design of all of your systems, your peer teams and what they're working on. So I do think you need to put a heck of a lot of effort into tech as a tech leader. I just think that if the manager who spends most of their time hopefully managing is the best engineer, there's something wrong.
I feel like at the director to VP level, there's a pecking order there. I feel like tech VPs get dinged and they get they stay at a certain strata. And then the B school VPs that are still tech VPs.
So you say B school, and I'm picturing like the worst schools, not business schools.
Business
I understand. I was thinking,
they did their Harvard MBA or whatever.
Yep.
And they're a tech VP.
Yep.
It seems like there's less friction for them to move up the hierarchy. And obviously, maybe this is the theme of the conversation. It's not fair, but it from a tech IC perspective, it seems backwards in a sense.
I think, fair or not fair, the higher up you get, the less likely it is that a tech decision makes your org fail or makes you less successful or more successful. In almost all businesses, I would say AWS was an very interesting alternative to that. Like, I don't remember. Were you in AWS? Did you go to the operational meeting? Because that's such awesome.
I knew about Charlie Bell's wheel.
Yeah. Oh man, like the best meeting for sure in my time at Amazon was the ops meeting, because you have, I don't remember because I counted once. I just sat there in the room counting because I was curious about the cost of this meeting. I think the cost I worked out to be like $45,000 for the, per hour or something, because of the people in the room, where you have Charlie Bell, Jassy sometimes, Sebastian, and then every distinguished engineer, senior principal and principal in the group, plus every L7 manager. There's like 200, whatever. I mean, however many people in this gigantic room, and we're reviewing ops issues
across AWS.
Across all of AWS. S3 had a latency issue in the EU West region, and we sit there and chat and talk. Not we. I mean, I kept my mouth shut in those discussions for sure. But like distinguished engineer arguing with a VP, everyone there was technical. You would be destroyed if you were not technical and you get called out or expected to say something. So I think in a lot of orgs, your success has nothing to do with tech stuff. You're not doing ops reviews in basically any other org at the VP level. It's just not happening. I just think that when you're saying, would you prefer? Yes, you always prefer they have tech skills. But I think when you get to that management level, their ability to communicate and manage up, I think the tech directors and VPs that I saw that looked like they were having trouble growing their career further was in part because they were technical, I think. Not because of their ability to be technical, but because they were involved in technical decisions when they probably should have taken a step back.
Let me push back a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is, you talked about this AWS ops meeting, but if you step back at the highest level, AWS, we're the back end for the internet. The customer is the business that an eventual person will use at the end of the day. And so your product is essentially high uptime.
Yep.
On top of the functionality that's there.
Yeah. Operations.
And so the reason you have this highly technical meeting is because the business will succeed or fail based off of the operational posture of the entire organization, the services that are there. And so who's in the room there? Who's running this thing? It's essentially Charlie Bell.
Mm-hmm.
When it came time to succeed Jeff Bezos, so you have Andy Jassy, a business school guy, I believe, goes up to the CEO. And then who's the heir apparent to be the CEO of AWS? Is it the person that runs this ridiculously tough operational meeting? And so I talked about the wheel. The wheel is this scary thing. They would literally load up every single dev team inside of AWS and spin the wheel.
That was scary.
And if that wheel of fortune slice landed on your team, it was your turn to present. And you better be prepared. So when it came time to come up with this, to have a CEO of AWS, we end up choosing the non-technical person.
Mm-hmm.
the technical person ends up moving to another company. And so I do think that generally there's a preference for the non-technical person. I'm just going to go out on a limb as well. The business person does have technical skills. I will give you that. There's no rocket science reason why a technical person cannot pick up some finance concepts, cannot pick up the business concepts.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. And so I do think that it's an interesting spot. But yeah, maybe the debate will just rage on forever.
Yeah, I think that if your focus is in the right spot, obviously technical skills doesn't hurt you and theoretically should help a bit. I think it's just how much it helps is not enough to overcome any fundamental differences in, I have these 3 VPs, I need one of them to run the whatever. They probably don't give a crap which of them is more technical. They care about who is going to run this org the best. And I think that, their technical ability probably falls pretty low on the importance scale.
So you went to Facebook for a couple of years, it sounds like?
Oh, just a little bit under 1 year.
Oh, okay. So you moonlighted or...
I swung through.
Yeah, for Meta/Facebook. Which place has the better culture, Facebook or Amazon?
Ouch. There's definitely no right answer there. I think that Facebook and Amazon, if I was making my own business, I would steal from both of them. I would definitely not say that one was better than the other. There were very interesting things about both. I mean, my reason for leaving Facebook so quickly was much more personal in terms of like my manager and org I was in rather than the company itself. Like an example, at Facebook in their promotion/OLR, like their performance review meeting, some manager said, this engineer has been doing really well. They've led this project and this other project, so I want to promote them. A couple people said, what about, did they do this well? And they said, yeah, they did that well. How about this? Did they do that well? Yeah, they did. Okay, sounds good. And I was just flabbergasted because I've been at Amazon where you require a document that has spent dozens of hours. And this was like a 45-second discussion of, I'd sort of like to promote this person. And I think someone else said, oh yeah, they're good. And someone else said, yeah, they're pretty good. The lack of formal process blew my mind. And this happened for many promotions. Like at least in the cycle, I attended one cycle like this. This was in California. I was just shocked. And so I asked around a little bit, trying to understand how can this possibly work? And they essentially said, what's the worst thing that happens if someone's promoted a little bit early? They either grow into their spot and they become good enough, or they don't grow and they fail again and we fire them and then we ding the manager for promoting them too early. And they said that what's much worse is if someone gets tired when they should have been promoted a year ago, and then they go through cycle after cycle, not jumping through the exact right hoops, and they end up giving up and leaving, and they were a high growth potential person who should have been at the next level. That's so much worse than just promoting someone early. I 100% agree. Amazon's promotion process is stupid. I would much rather, like if I had to choose, I would rather regret promoting someone a little early. Like I said, like sometimes it's just early and that's sort of okay. They might get like worse ratings for a little bit and they'll be like, hey man, you were promoted a little bit early. You haven't been nailing this, principal role. It's much better to do that than I don't know how many people I saw get burned out or quit because they should have been promoted a while ago. And we're like, hey, why don't you wait another 6 months? It's like wait another 6 months. I'm sorry. How long is your life? 6 months is a long time. Like percentage wise, that's terrible. I really like that about Meta. Their lack of process around some of that stuff and the like worst case scenario is not that bad. So let's just move forward. It's really refreshing.
You've said that managers will test pushback by proposing absurd ideas and seeing if their people will push back on them. Why do managers play these stupid games? I
think when I would say absurd ideas, I don't mean absurd ideas in part because no one would believe you. If you said, hey, why don't we consider shutting our service down? It's like, okay, what are you drinking today? What I'm talking about in terms of absurd ideas is in the realm of credible, but it's probably not going to work, or there's probably reasons why this shouldn't work. And I'd say there's two major reasons I can go into. One is I like to pressure test the assumptions that my team is making by proposing that we don't do it. I heard once early on in the Bar Raiser program was your vote shouldn't necessarily be the choice you want to make. Sometimes you want to pressure test what the group is doing. So I knew a bar raiser who said he would look at the votes, and if he saw all were yes or all were no, he would always pick the opposite to force a discussion. I think one of the jobs of someone who is paying attention, actively thinking, a person confident enough to say something, which is frequently the manager, it is a good position to hold the opposite opinion of the group at least hear the argument, see how much they push back. And I don't know how many times people would just fold. And I'm like, wait a second, like you were very confident we should do this. I said this and you said, sure. Which brings me to the other one, which is especially with, I would say, more junior people. It's not necessary for senior people, but more junior people. I absolutely think one of my jobs is to train them to say no. With my managers, I would regularly tell them something that I know that they should disagree with or would disagree with or probably have a different opinion on. And actually, part of the training is very hesitantly and scared. They tell their director, I don't think we should do that. And here's why. And I'm like, oh, that's a great point. Thanks so much for countering me. I'm glad you spoke up. How do you set the tone for an org? I mentioned like some orgs are terrible and some orgs are good to work in. One of the ways you make your org terrible or good, or you set the tone in your org is how do you react to people? What do you approve? What do you encourage versus not encourage? And I always want to encourage people to speak up. I never, ever want them to say, I'm afraid to mention that to Dave because he's the senior leader. And so one of the most important things in my mind to teach is like, you should always speak up. You should always say your mind. I never want anyone to think, I knew that wasn't going to work, but I stayed quiet. That should never, ever happen.
So it sounds like you're trying to teach the lesson of the emperor has no clothes, not by telling the story of the emperor has no clothes,
but by having no clothes on,
by being naked in front of your coworkers.
Yeah.
No, by taking the contrary opinion, by maybe throwing an idea out there and seeing how other folks react. So it's not necessarily from a like, hey, let's see if these guys know what's going on. It's more from a like show rather than tell place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for anything, you learn more by showing rather than telling and saying, I've heard managers say, I have an open door policy, just come and tell me anything. And you go to tell them something and they're offended and angry. I mean, I've had that before where I go to tell my manager something that's worrying me and they shoot me down hard. I only need one of those with one of my managers to like, oh, okay, I get it. You are not okay with open door policy. You do not want me to tell you things that I think are a problem. And so I think that those are the lessons that people take really hard in either direction. And so I disagree with them once. They tell me their other opinion. I say, that's a really interesting point. I like how you mentioned this. Yeah, we should do it your way. And I think from then on, they always know they're comfortable. They're excited to point out to me when they've noticed something that maybe I haven't. And they'll tell me, hey, maybe you haven't considered this. And I will always thank them for that. It's like as fast as I can, I will point out what's good about their idea, even if it's not great, because that's a behavior that I think is super critical in any team.
Last question about Amazon. What do people get wrong about the company from the outside?
There's a running theme, if you read about Amazon's culture, that Amazon is a terrible place to work, that it is, people are jerks. They just burn you out. They hire people just to fire them, all this kind of stuff, which I think is nonsense. Sorry. It's nonsense that we hire people to fire them because it's usually so hard to hire them. I remember like how many hours I spent interviewing people, and then someone would say, you just hire them to fire them. I'm like, do you know how many hours I spent interviewing people? There's no way they would burn my director time interviewing people 10 hours a week. Like that's a lot of money they just spent on interviewing. You think they would hire them just to fire them? Like that's just ridiculous. But Amazon itself, just the way it operates is, like we've always said, like lots of clusters of startups, and there's like lots of little companies and bigger companies and orgs, and the managers and the people on them have a lot of autonomy, and there's so little that is Amazon wide. If someone says this is how it was like for me at Amazon, I take that with a huge grain of salt for Amazon specifically, because there's very little culture across all of Amazon. It's driven by the people in the orgs and the teams you're on, and like it was different for every org I joined. Every org is very different, and so I have seen terrible, mean people working at Amazon and other places. So it can happen, and they could make their org miserable. And so I think that this misunderstanding of like Amazon is a hard-bitten, terrible place is probably a misunderstanding of how Amazon's organized. It's don't join that VP's org, don't join this other VP's org, don't join that manager's org. But if you find the right place, I think the idea that Amazon is a bad place is just a misunderstanding.
It's more like a lotto ticket.
Yes.
Sort of
Oh,
thing.
absolutely. And that's one of the big reasons why I've mentioned before, I helped change the transfer process at Amazon in large part because of this, because there was a peer manager, which is sort of like my long-term revenge plan, which I think is sort of funny. A peer manager had every person on their team had less than 12 months tenure. And I found out quickly it was because as soon as people hit 12 months, like literally the 12-month time frame was when you were allowed to transfer. That day, they would transfer off his team because they hated it there. And he'd been there for years. And I talked to people on his team. Universally, they said, well, yeah, as soon as I hit 12 months, I'm leaving. And I thought, this is stupid. How is he not getting punished for this? And I attend OLR, I mentioned the fact that like his attrition's high and people say, yeah, his team's sort of hard. I'm like, okay, his team is hard. Like his team is hard because of him. This is years. It is not a technical problem that people quit. Like this, it's like,
It's the manager's
it's
fault.
the manager. It has to be the manager. That's the one person who controls everything on that team. We changed the transfer policy to say you can transfer at any time. And his team empties and he gets fired. And I heard other people saying, my org was destroyed. You've ruined Amazon, which is sort of hilarious. Like I got an email from a VP saying you've ruined Amazon. Like, this is like literally, you've ruined Amazon.
What was your role in changing the policy? Because I actually bring up the freedom of movement as one of the most enlightened decisions that Amazon had ever made. And it sounds like
thank you.
it sounds like you had a hand in it.
Yeah. So Nick Giubbatario, who wrote the reply to the people are crying at their desks, he wrote sort of a famous LinkedIn post. He and I were bar raisers and I don't remember exactly how it started, but it was essentially we were talking the bar raiser list. I think I brought up this transfer policy is stupid. How do you think we could go about changing it? Or I think I started with, do people agree that this is bad? And a bunch of bar raisers chimed in saying, I agree it's bad. I said, you know what? I'm going to write a policy proposal that we change the transfer policy at Amazon. And Nick contacted me and said, dude, let me help out. Essentially, we wrote a white paper, got feedback from a bunch of bar raisers, got feedback from other people, worked with HR, who coincidentally was also writing a transfer policy paper. And they essentially said, let's work independently. Let's keep them independent. You write your bar raiser proposal, like from the bar raiser org saying, essentially, our argument was in large part, we have to bar raise so many interviews because we have so much attrition. We have so much attrition because organizational problems are only solved by people quitting the company when they're stuck there for 12 months. And so we wrote a doc, the HR team wrote a doc, they compiled these and brought them to Jeff and his team. Jeff said, yes, I agree. And took the policy. And like my crowning moment was he just sent out the email announcement saying, we're changing the policy. And he used a quote from my doc, which was like word for word. Cause I was like, that's my quote. It was very exciting.
That's awesome. I realize I might not have provided the context for the viewer, which is essentially when you joined Amazon, you didn't have freedom of movement. You needed to stay on a team for at least a year before you moved to another team. And there was also this terrible policy, which is like a director or VP could come in and essentially block your transfer if they make the argument that you were critical to the business.
Yep. And everyone became critical of the business then.
Exactly. And so what ended up happening, teams within payments, teams within ordering, right before Black Friday, operationally bad teams, you would actually have more than 100% attrition for the year because attrition was measured on a yearly basis. That was the unit. And so you would hire somebody, they would leave, and then they would hire somebody again, and that person would leave.
Yep.
And so thank you for doing that. Yeah. I think that was, you moved the problem from having it be borne by the individual contributor to having it be borne by the manager, which is where it belongs.
And like the problem gets solved really fast. It's amazing how fast tech problems of this is a hard space get solved when you replace the manager. And someone else comes in and says, oh, well, I see the problem here, and goes ahead and fixes things.
Awesome. Let's talk about money. So you've written that you saved 85% of your income, and now you were able to retire in your 40s. Have you made the last dollar that you'll ever spend?
Well, I wouldn't say I've made the last dollar, considering I'm making a good number of dollars from my newsletter. So last dollar from a corporation, chances are pretty good that I have. I thought for a while when I left, I went from Amazon to Bezos Academy as sort of like my retirement job, because as a nonprofit, Bezos Academy was not going to pay me what Amazon did. But I'd reached the point where I didn't need more corporate money. And so I thought, hey, this is a fun transition. I get to work for a nonprofit. And then I left that to go retire, travel for a while, and then figure out what I'll do next. The standard, I don't feel like working right now, but if I take some time off, I'll want to do something. And so I started writing and the newsletter took off. And now it becomes I'd have to drop the newsletter if I got a job. And I like the newsletter more than any job. Making money from a newsletter feels so different because it's your own little hobby rather than a corporate job where someone can tell me what to do. And when I can, I sat there just a couple of days ago, like changing some of my logos and branding stuff. And I'm like, I really, really like not having to run anything past anyone because it's my thing. Yeah, it's the last of my corporate money, I think, but certainly not the last of the money.
What sort of money advice would you give somebody that's maybe starting in their journey? Like, what's a good mindset to think about when it comes to money?
I guess an extreme one here. So I've told people at Amazon, because I had a lot of college hires, their first careers at Amazon. And I remember, I think it was my first team, maybe my second team. There was a group of college hires sitting around and they were talking about things they had bought. They're like 6 months in, 9 months into Amazon. And they were like going through the laundry list of I bought this car and then I bought this camera and I bought this TV and I bought this other computer. And they're like, oh yeah, I bought that computer too. And because everyone had their first money in their whole career. One of them said, I'm just not sure how to spend the money anymore. It's just piling up and I'm trying to figure out how to spend it. And they were giving him ideas. And I'm like, guys, like you should be saving your money while like the idea of finding somewhere to spend, like it's like purposely trying to run up that hedonistic treadmill. Like I just need to spend more. If you started your career and said, I will save at least 50% of everything I make. I mean, these are tech careers, right? Like this is possible. I will save 50% of my take-home salary for the rest of my career. You will be retiring in, I think it's like 16 or 17 years. So nice short career lifespan that's needed. If you ever stop that increase, as your income goes up, if you ever stop that increase and like hold on to just inflation, then your savings rate will even go up. So it's less than a 17, 16-year career that's needed. And you won't even notice the difference. Like you haven't got on the hedonistic treadmill. You're making 120 years, so you try to spend only 60. You might need to be in a cheaper apartment than your coworkers, and you might need to buy that new computer a month later or something silly like that. But you won't even notice. I would definitely tell my kids, anyone starting, is like, try picking a fairly extreme, but I think totally doable, like 50% savings rate. And you will be shocked at how much money you have in 15 years from now.
What's something that's overvalued right now that you are just super annoyed that people are paying so much attention to it?
Well, I would say, and I don't know if this is quite answering your question, but there's a lot of articles saying people are getting fired and engineering teams are shrinking and layoffs are happening because of AI. And I think we're very much in the early days of AI literally replacing engineers. And so I think that this is finance driven, not efficiency driven. I'm not at all convinced that the reason companies are doing layoffs now is because of AI. I think it's a convenient excuse to explain to the public and to their investors, like, we are hitting AI efficiencies, so we are laying off another 1,000 people. I'm like, that's bull. Like, AI, maybe, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence of like maybe or maybe not, it's somewhere in the realm of like becoming valuable to certain engineers, is maybe making them more efficient at writing code, but a lot of times that time is being spent on the back end. So I think that it's vastly overblown, this idea of we have caused utter destruction to the engineering headcount. I think that's a finance thing. I think you see rates drop. I think you start seeing hiring happen again. Watch the rates and watch the hiring. And when we had really low Fed rates, we had tons of hiring going on. And when the rates went up, bunch of companies started doing layoffs. It's a finance-driven thing, not an AI-driven thing.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thanks so much for joining me in this conversation. I had a wonderful time.
Oh, I had a good time too, Steve. Thanks.
If people want more from you, where should they go?
My newsletter is Scarlet Ink. So scarletinc.com is the main way to find me. I'm also Dave Anderson on LinkedIn, of which I imagine if you search for Dave Anderson on LinkedIn, I'd be the top person probably.
Oh, we're playing that game, right? Or you just put our name in and
just search for it. It'd probably be in your show notes though. But I would say that searching for my name usually will find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.